Previously on Gold in the Shadows, the men who got in my way the year I tried not to be gay.
A trip to Colorado opens the door to something deeper than friendship. In the quiet closeness of shared space, lingering looks, and a bed big enough for two, the ache I thought I could manage begins to take on a life of its own.
This week on Gold in the Shadows, Chapter 5, Letters from Jon and Josh.
At 39, during my year of covenant to not be gay, I cut out media, let my hair grow, and prayed harder. One last serious attempt to make peace with my desires for men. But memory did not submit to discipline. Silence did not erase longing. It clarified it. And among the men who returned to me that year, Jon and Josh came back together. Not as a pair, exactly. More as opposing poles. Two different invitations. Two different ways of being wanted. I was 26, Jon was 24, Josh was 28, and I had just spent a physically charged few days in Colorado with Josh before meeting his brother Jon. With Josh, I felt a deep sense of masculine ease and safety. With Jon, I felt something even more dangerous. Recognition. A few days later, I was back at Seminary in Kentucky, trying to resume a life that already felt slightly false. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Chapel, classes, brick walkways, men with books and backpacks moving toward lives that seemed clear and holy. But inwardly, part of me was still in Colorado, still in Josh's apartment, still in Jon's presence, still in that strange, suspended space where desire, tenderness, and possibility had begun pressing against the life I thought I was supposed to want. Jon reached for me first. His emails started arriving soon after I got back, and they changed the feel of my days almost immediately. They weren't explicit. That was part of what made them so dangerous. They stayed within the safe language we had then. Gratitude, friendship, honesty, faith. But beneath all that moved something warmer and harder to contain. Then came the letter. He told me he had been thinking about me since I left, that he had felt safe with me, that our time together had meant more to him than he could say in person. He wrote that he had wanted, for a long time, the kind of friend he could really be close to, and that, after last week, he had felt closer to me than anyone in years. He even mentioned the hug goodbye, that it had stayed with him, that it had awakened something in him he had wanted for a long time, the ease of being close to another man without fear. I read the letter more than once. Then again, not because it crossed a line, but because it came right up to the edge of one and stayed there, breathing. It said, in the most careful way possible, that I had mattered to him, and because it echoed my own hunger so precisely, it felt less like correspondence than confirmation. He had not imagined it. Neither had I. In the celibate, reparative therapy culture I was still trying to live inside, male affection could be named good, even healing, but only if it remained bounded. The nearness could not awaken too much. The embrace could not say too much. You could be comforted by another man, but you were not supposed to want to stay there. Jon made me want more, not necessarily an affair, but certainly more than my theology knew what to bless. Around that same time, Will began noticing I was off. Will already knew enough about my struggle that Colorado wouldn't have sounded simple to him. We knew each other through soccer. He was married, grounded, athletic, studying physical therapy alongside seminary, and the kind of man I would have identified then as exactly the sort I needed to be around. Straight, solid, emotionally decent. One afternoon we were walking to the soccer field for a big game when he asked where I'd been over break. Colorado, I said. Vacation? Will asked. Sort of, I said. Then I added, you remember that conference I told you about? I ended up seeing one of the guys I met there, or really two of them. Brothers. He gave me a look. Brothers? Yeah, I said. A small smile crossed his face. That sounds potentially complicated. I laughed, but only because he wasn't wrong. Before the game, I cracked the door just a little wider. I'm still not sure what happened out there, I said. Or maybe I know, and I just don't know what to call it. It all feels unfinished. With both of them? He asked. That caught me. Yeah, I said. With both of them, but differently. He slowed a little as we neared the field. Differently how? He asked. One of them felt immediate, emotionally, like something in me recognized him too fast, I explained. And the other? He asked. The other was more direct, I shared. Direct how? Will questioned. I smiled, uneasy, and said, I don't know if I want to answer that before kickoff. So the conversation paused there. Then the game began. And yet, even during the game, the earlier conversation stayed with me. I noticed Will differently because of it. How he called for the ball, how he steadied the field around him, how naturally he belonged in his body and in that world. I noticed the quick glance before a pass, the easy confidence in his shoulders. I'd been watching men like that for years, studying them without meaning to, trying to understand the secret language of ease. That ease was part of what drew me to him. It was also part of what made talking to him feel risky. Men like Will seemed to inhabit so naturally the fraternity I was always trying to enter. I could never tell whether confiding in them would draw me closer or expose, once again, how different I was. After the game, we ended up alone on the bench, unlacing our cleats while the field emptied around us. For a while, we said nothing. Then Will looked down at his hands and said, So, those brothers in Colorado? Yeah, you've been thinking about them a lot. More than I should, probably. Both? Yeah, I said, but not the same way. Jon feels closer, I said, more emotionally immediate, like something in me recognized him too fast. And Josh? He asked. I offered. Josh is different, more direct, more embodied somehow, more likely to just ask for what he wants. Will nodded. And what do they want? That got close to the nerve of it. I'm not sure I fully know, I said, but I know what I feel like when I hear from them. What's that? He asked. Pulled, I suggested. Toward what? That was the question, wasn't it? Toward closeness, I said finally. The kind that starts out feeling safe and then gets harder to name. Will was quiet, and then asked, You mean because they're guys? There was no accusation in it, just a naming. Yeah, I said. I told him a little more then, that Jon's messages had started to matter too much, that Josh's carried a different energy, less about what had been shared, more about what might still happen. What made Jon significant? He asked. It felt easy, I said. We talked for hours. It felt like we skipped a bunch of steps. And Josh? He asked. I smiled without humor and said, Josh makes me imagine a different kind of life. That landed between us. Jon made me feel known. Josh made me imagine movement. Then Will asked the question I knew was coming. You're not thinking about pursuing something, are you? I looked down at my hands. No, I said. And that was true, at least in the moral and practical sense we both meant it. A sexual relationship with either of them was out of the question. I believed that. Will believed that. I'm not thinking that way. Or rather, I was not allowing myself to think that way aloud, because beneath the answer I gave him was another one entirely. Some part of me wanted to drop everything and go back to Colorado, to live in that dangerous place between Jon and Josh, between tenderness and invitation, between being known and being wanted. But the proper words came out instead. I'm not thinking that way. Will let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. Okay, he said. That matters. It did matter. And yet I also knew the truth was more complicated than the answer I had given him. I was not plotting an affair, but I was aching for a form of closeness that my theology permitted only in fragments. I wanted affection, affirmation, warmth, nearness. I wanted to be chosen by another man and not have to amputate that desire the moment it began to feel too good. Will seemed to understand at least part of that. Well, he said after a while, I'm glad you told me. Then he looked at me more directly. You know I'm in your corner, right? I nodded. What I heard beneath that was not agreement, certainly not endorsement, but it was still a kind of mercy. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not afraid of this conversation. You don't have to carry it all alone. That mattered. And you're still coming to New Hampshire to help with the soccer camps, right? Will shouted as we parted on the forked path. Yep. Yeah. That's coming up here pretty quickly, isn't it? I yelled back. That will be a welcome distraction from my current triangle of trouble, I thought to myself. I continued thinking about my conversation with Will and my emails and letters from Jon and Josh as I made my way across campus back to my dorm room. If Jon's messages kept the ache alive, Josh's messages raised the stakes. He was more direct, more future-facing. He wanted me back in Colorado, not just for another visit. He wanted me there full-time. Even when he kept the language guarded, I could feel what sat beneath it. He wanted me near him. Then I got a call from my dad in Cincinnati. Josh had sent a physical letter to my home in Ohio, but before I ever got the chance to read it, he called my father and asked him to return it. At the time, I had no idea what Josh had written, only that it must have mattered deeply for him to send it, and then panic deeply enough to call my father and ask for it back. Maybe he had put more of himself on the page than he meant to. Maybe he had written his deeper feelings, his regret that I'd left, his wish to have me there with him. Maybe once the letter was on its way, fear set in. That was almost worse than reading it would have been, because an unread letter can become every possibility at once. Jon was telling me I mattered. Josh was asking, in his own way, whether I might come back. And back at seminary, I was still trying to call all of it friendship. But by then, I already knew better, or at least I knew enough to feel the danger, not only because of what I wanted, but because Jon and Josh had not simply stirred desire in me. They had exposed something older, something hungrier, something I had spent years trying to restrain, spiritualize, or explain away. And for the first time, I knew I needed help naming it. That was when I went to see Dr. Joy, a seminary professor of mine, a mentor and confidant, someone who knew me well. At the time, I thought I was bringing him a problem to solve: attachment, temptation, unfinished longing. I did not yet know he would hand me a different question entirely, one about shadow and whether the dark places I feared most might be hiding something good. I wasn't ready to believe that. Not then. At that point, all I knew was this: Colorado had followed me home. The men were only multiplying, and whatever I had tried to leave behind was already waiting for me in the company of men.
Next time on Gold in the Shadows.
I returned from Colorado carrying more than memories. The ache of leaving Jon and Josh is still very much alive. But somewhere, at the edge of everything, another man begins to appear. Matthias. Back at seminary, I sit across from my professor and mentor, Dr. Joy, still trying to make sense of what life and my desire is telling me. And Dr. Joy asks the question I am not ready to answer. What if the darkness is not only where shame hides? What if it is also where something good has been buried? In a room full of men trying to survive their own divided hearts, I begin to wonder whether my desires are distractions or clues, whether the parts of me I've spent years trying to bury might hold something I was never meant to lose. A suspicion begins to form. A crack opens in the old certainty, and somewhere beneath all the conflict, something starts to shimmer. The first glint of gold.
Chapter 6. Mining for Gold in the Company of Men. Because sometimes the shadow is not the end of the story. Sometimes it is where the story begins to shine. Airing most Fridays, Gold in the Shadows. The Men Who Got in My Way, The Year I Tried Not to Be Gay, is a production of the Good Life Lab with Dr. Dave.